The red and blue lights washed over the dashboard in slow pulses, turning the empty road into something unreal. The officer leaned into the driver's window, his shadow stretching across the steering wheel. "Do you see this bag right here?" He held up a small evidence pouch, the plastic catching the light. Inside was a white powder, packed tight. "Found it sitting in your door pocket," he said calmly. "Don't tell me you don't know what that is." Darnell Isaiah Brooks didn't move. His hands stayed exactly where they were, flat on the steering wheel, fingers spread. His voice, when it came, was steady. "That's not mine, officer. I don't carry anything like that." The officer exhaled through his nose and leaned closer, one hand resting near his holster, not touching it, but close enough to be noticed. "Yeah, sure," he said. "I know how guys like you move. Keep it handy. Quick grab. Then you play innocent." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. There was no one else around to hear them. "If you keep lying," the officer continued, "there's a whole stack of charges coming your way tonight. Possession, intent, maybe more." The road behind them was empty. Midnight had passed. To anyone driving by, this would have looked like another routine traffic stop, one car pulled over, one officer doing his job. But nothing about this moment was routine, because that bag hadn't been there before. And in the space of a few seconds, a lie had been placed in plain view, heavy with consequences. One word from the man holding the badge could change everything that came next. The officer watched the driver closely now, eyes lingering on his face, then dropping slowly to his hands, as if waiting for a mistake. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said quietly. "We can end this right here, or we can take a ride." Darnell Brooks swallowed once, then looked straight ahead, forcing his breathing to stay slow. He didn't know how this would end. He only knew one thing for sure. This stop was no longer about the law. Officer Jeffrey Paul Renner had been wearing a badge for nearly 15 years. He wasn't new. He wasn't reckless. And he didn't see himself as a villain. Renner worked the night shift by choice. He liked the quiet roads, the thin traffic, the absence of supervisors checking in too often. After midnight, the job felt simpler. Fewer witnesses, fewer reports, fewer questions. On paper, he was considered proactive. Supervisors described him as old school, hands-on, the kind of officer who didn't hesitate to make a stop when something felt off. His reports were clean. His numbers looked solid. He knew exactly how to write them. What didn't appear on those reports was how often the same streets showed up, the same stretches of road just outside the city, the same hours, the same kinds of drivers. Renner justified it to himself easily. He told himself he was working high-activity areas, that instincts came from experience, that patterns existed for a reason, and for years, no one challenged that belief. Complaints, when they came in, rarely went far. Most stops happened late enough that drivers were tired, alone, and eager to get home. Few wanted to push back. Fewer still thought anyone would listen. Renner had learned something important early in his career. Confidence mattered more than truth. If you spoke with certainty, people doubted themselves. If you applied pressure slowly, most folded before they realized what was happening. By the time he leaned into that car window on Old National Highway, Renner had done this more times than he could count. To him, this wasn't a gamble, it was routine. And routines, when repeated long enough, start to feel untouchable. Darnell Isaiah Brooks was 33 years old, and he had just finished a double shift. He was an EMT, the kind who learned early how to stay calm when everything around him was breaking apart. 12 hours of calls. Accidents, chest pains, people at their worst moments. By the time he clocked out, exhaustion had settled into his bones. He was still wearing his dark work pants. His county-issued jacket lay folded neatly on the passenger seat. The radio clipped to it, powered down for the night. When the blue lights appeared behind him, Brooks didn't feel panic. He felt caution. He slowed gradually, signaled, and eased his car onto the shoulder. He shut off the engine, rolled the window halfway down, placed both hands on the steering wheel before anyone asked him to. Not because he'd been stopped often, But because he understood how quickly routine encounters could change when assumptions were made before words were spoken, Brooks had seen emergencies unfold in seconds. He knew how tone, posture, and silence could escalate or defuse a situation. Tonight, he chose stillness. He sat upright, eyes forward, breathing slow and controlled. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't adjust the radio. He waited. In the side mirror, he watched the officer approach. Flashlight cutting across the interior of the car. It paused briefly on Brooks's face before moving on, lingering just long enough to feel like an assessment. Brooks didn't speak first. He already sensed something was off. And as the officer stopped beside his window, Brooks understood that this night wasn't going to be as simple as answering a few questions and driving home. The officer didn't greet him. No, good evening. No explanation for the stop. Instead, the flashlight beam swept slowly across the interior of the car, moving from the dashboard to the passenger seat, then back again, as if something was expected to appear. "Where you coming from?" the officer asked. "Work," Brooks replied calmly. "What kind of work?" "EMT, Brooks said. "Just finished a shift." The officer's eyes flicked briefly to the folded jacket on the seat. He smirked, almost imperceptibly, and nodded as if that confirmed something only he could see. "Where you headed?" "Home." The flashlight paused again. Then the officer leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I smell something illegal." Brooks didn't react. He shook his head slightly. "There's nothing illegal in the car, officer." The officer straightened, then smiled faintly. "Step out of the vehicle anyway." The words weren't a request. Brooks took a breath and did exactly what he was told. He opened the door slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, and stepped onto the shoulder of the road. The air was cool, the sound of passing traffic distant and occasional. As soon as Brooks was outside the car, the questions continued. "You got anything on you I should know about?" "No, sir." The officer circled him once, eyes moving, measuring. Brooks noticed how little the man seemed to listen. Answers were given, but they didn't slow the pace or change the direction. When Brooks mentioned again that he'd just come from work, the officer shook his head slightly. "Funny," he said. "A lot of people out here late at night with jobs and stories." Brooks said nothing. He was beginning to understand that this stop wasn't about information. It was about control. The officer told Brooks to turn around and place his hands on the hood. Brooks complied without hesitation, fingers spread, palms flat against the cold metal. He kept his movements slow and deliberate, exactly the way he had been trained to in other people's emergencies. "I'm going to pat you down," the officer said, his voice flat, almost bored. "Just for my safety." Brooks nodded. "Yes, sir." The pat-down was thorough, too thorough. The officer's hands moved with practiced familiarity, pausing longer than necessary, pressing where they didn't need to press. When he reached Brooks's pockets, he stopped. "What's this?" the officer asked. "My wallet," Brooks replied. The officer removed it and opened it without asking. He flipped through the bills, counting silently. His eyebrows lifted slightly. A short breath of laughter escaped him. "Well, well," he said. "Didn't expect this." Inside was just over $4,000. "That's a lot of cash," the officer continued, glancing at Brooks over his shoulder. "Especially for someone like you." Brooks felt the words land, sharp and deliberate. "I just got paid," he said calmly. "Overtime. Rent's due in a couple days." The officer didn't look at him. He closed the wallet and held it loosely in his hand, staring out toward the dark road, as if considering something. "I didn't ask for a speech," he said. He tapped the wallet once against his palm, then again. The sound was soft, but the message wasn't. Brooks stayed silent, eyes forward, heart steady but alert. He understood now that the money wasn't just money anymore. It had become leverage. And standing there with his hands on the hood, Brooks realized the stop had crossed into something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with traffic and everything to do with power. The officer stepped back, still holding the wallet, and looked at Brooks as if weighing him. "I'm going to be straight with you," he said. "I've got reason to search your vehicle." Brooks turned his head slightly. "What reason is that, officer?" The officer took a step closer, lowering his voice so it barely carried beyond the shoulder of the road. "I decide the reason." He let the words sit for a moment, then continued, "If I search that car and I find what I think I'm going to find, you're going to jail tonight. Possession, maybe intent. And guys like you don't usually get much sympathy once the paperwork starts." Brooks felt the weight of the statement, but he didn't react. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, the officer's tone shifted. "Or," he said quietly, "we handle this another way." He lifted the wallet slightly, tapping it against his palm again, slow and deliberate. "I'm trying to help you out," he added. "No charges, no record. You get home. I move on." The implication was clear. Brooks took a breath, then asked calmly, "Am I being detained, or am I free to leave?" For the first time, the officer smiled. "Right now," he said, "you're being given an opportunity." The smile didn't reach his eyes. Brooks nodded slowly, absorbing the meaning of the moment. He understood the choice being offered to him wasn't a real one at all. This wasn't about guilt or innocence. It was about whether he would submit quietly or make himself a problem. There was a brief silence after the officer's words, broken only by the sound of a car passing somewhere in the distance. Brooks kept his eyes forward. He didn't rush to respond. He knew that anything said too quickly could be twisted into something else. "Can I make a phone call?" he asked finally. The officer hesitated. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. His eyes flicked toward the road, then back to Brooks. "Make it quick," he said, stepping back a half pace. Brooks reached for his phone slowly, making sure every movement was visible. He unlocked it, scrolled once, then dialed a number he didn't need to look at. When the call connected, he turned slightly away from the officer, keeping his voice low. "I got stopped," Brooks said. "I need you to listen." On the other end of the line, the response came calmly, without surprise. "Stay calm," the voice said. "Do nothing sudden. Don't consent to anything. Remember everything that's said." Brooks nodded, though the person couldn't see him. "I understand," he replied. The call ended quietly. The officer watched the entire time, arms crossed, his expression unchanged. To him, the call meant nothing. People called friends and family all the time, hoping for reassurance, hoping for backup that never came. He had no way of knowing that the voice on the other end belonged to Calvin Brooks, a federal agent who didn't ask questions yet, didn't interrupt, and didn't need details to understand what was unfolding. As Brooks slipped the phone back into his pocket, the officer turned toward the car again, already preparing to continue the search. For him, the stop was back on track. For Brooks, everything had just shifted quietly, invisibly, and irreversibly. The officer returned to the patrol car briefly, then came back with his flashlight already on, the beam steady and bright. "You're not free to leave," he said. The words landed without emotion, like a switch being flipped. He stepped closer to Brooks now, positioning himself just behind Brooks's shoulder, close enough that Brooks could feel his presence without turning around. It was deliberate, a control move. "Spread your feet," the officer said. Brooks complied. Wider. Brooks adjusted again. "Don't move," the officer added, his voice firm. "And don't make this harder than it needs to be." The officer keyed his radio and spoke just loud enough for Brooks to hear. "Dispatch, I'm out with a subject." The phrasing mattered. It always did. A subject, not a driver. A potential problem, not a person. Brooks stared at the pavement in front of him, breathing evenly, his hands still visible. He could feel how carefully the moment was being framed. The officer began searching the vehicle, opening compartments one by one. The glove box, the center console, under the seats. He narrated just enough for the body camera, his voice controlled and professional. Brooks stayed exactly where he was told. A car slowed as it passed. Then another. The officer noticed and shifted his position, angling his body so the patrol car partially blocked the view. Still, a woman in a passing car turned her head and stared longer than most people did. "Eyes forward," the officer said sharply. Brooks obeyed. The search continued. Slower now, more deliberate. When the officer finished with the front of the car, he moved to the back seat, then the trunk, taking his time. This wasn't about finding something. It was about setting the stage for what came next. When the officer finished searching the trunk, he didn't close it right away. He stood there for a moment, looking down the empty space as if disappointed. Then he turned back toward Brooks. "You got lucky so far," he said, "but I'm not done." He motioned toward the curb. "Sit." Brooks lowered himself carefully, bending at the knees, keeping his hands visible as he settled onto the cold concrete. The chill seeped through his clothes, grounding him in the moment. The officer stood over him, arms crossed. "People like you always think if you act calm, it changes the outcome," he said. "It doesn't." Brooks looked up briefly. "I'm just doing what you told me to do." The officer stared at him for a long second, jaw tightening. "That's a good start," he replied. Another patrol car passed slowly. The officer inside glanced over, recognized the scene, and kept moving. No wave, no stop. Brooks noticed. The officer noticed Brooks noticing. "You're hoping someone saves you," the officer said quietly. "That's not how this works." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice again. "I've been doing this a long time. I know when someone's dirty." Brooks said nothing. He clasped his hands together lightly on his knees, interlacing his fingers to keep them still. The officer's eyes snapped to the movement immediately. "Don't move," he warned. "I'm not," Brooks replied calmly. The officer straightened, irritation flashing across his face. He stepped away and spoke into his radio again, this time requesting another unit. Not urgent, just enough to escalate. Across the street, a man walking his dog slowed and pretended to check his phone. A car pulled into a nearby lot and stopped. Someone inside raised a phone, holding it low. The officer noticed the glow and shifted his body to block the view. "This is turning into a show," he muttered. For the first time that night, the situation was no longer entirely under his control. The second patrol car pulled in behind the first, its headlights cutting across the shoulder of the road. The officer who stepped out was younger, quieter. He nodded briefly to Rayner, then let his eyes move to Brooks, sitting on the curb, hands folded, posture controlled. "You good?" the younger officer asked. Rayner didn't answer right away. He scanned the road, the bystanders, the faint glow of a phone still visible across the street. "Yeah," he said finally. "Just handling something." The younger officer didn't leave. He stayed near his car, watching. Rayner turned back to Brooks, his voice lower now, sharper. "Stand up." Brooks rose slowly. Rayner stepped closer than necessary, guiding Brooks a few inches to the left with a hand on his shoulder. "I told you not to make this harder," Rayner said. "I haven't," Brooks replied. It wasn't defiant, just factual. Rayner paused, eyes narrowing. "You sure about that?" He turned away abruptly and walked back to his patrol car. When he returned, he was holding a small evidence bag. "Found something," Rayner said, holding it up so everyone could see. Inside was a small amount of white powder. "That was in your center console." Brooks looked at the bag, then back at Rayner. "That wasn't there." Rayner snapped his head toward him. "You don't get to tell me what was in your car." The younger officer stepped closer. "Sarge, you mind if I take a look?" Rayner hesitated. "Just a beat." "Go ahead," he said. The younger officer checked the console, then looked back at Brooks, then at Rayner. He didn't say anything, but his expression had changed. What had been routine was no longer routine, and everyone there could feel it. The radio crackled. "Dispatch requesting status." Rayner answered without looking away from Brooks. "Possible possession," he said. "Still investigating." The words were careful, measured. Brooks took a slow breath. "Can I make another phone call?" he asked. Rayner's head snapped toward him. "You already made one." "I was told to call back if things escalated," Brooks said calmly. The younger officer shifted his weight, eyes moving between them. "Sarge," he said quietly, "if he's requesting, I'll decide." Rayner stared at him for a moment, then back at Brooks. His jaw tightened. "Make it quick," Rayner said. Brooks reached for his phone slowly, pausing to make sure every movement was visible. He unlocked it and dialed. The line connected almost immediately. "Where are you?" the voice asked. "Old National. Traffic stop." There was a pause. "Put the officer on." Rayner stiffened. "Who is this?" he asked sharply. Calvin Brooks, the voice replied. FBI. The word landed hard. The younger officer's head turned instantly toward Renner. The bystanders across the street stopped pretending not to watch. One phone was now clearly raised. Renner let out a short, forced laugh. You got a lot of nerve, he said. I'm documenting you, Calvin Brooks said calmly. You've extended this stop without cause. You've searched without consent. And you're on camera. Renner looked around. The patrol cars, the people, the second officer standing just far enough away. For the first time that night, Renner didn't issue a command. Badge number, he said finally. You first, Calvin replied. Renner hesitated, then rattled it off. Thank you, Calvin Brooks said. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to disengage. You're going to release my cousin, and you're going to leave this scene exactly as it is. Renner handed the phone back without another word. He rubbed his face once, then turned to the younger officer. Cut him loose, he said quietly. No charges. Brooks picked up his jacket and phone. Movement steady, controlled. As he walked past Renner, he stopped for just a second. You should probably call your supervisor, Brooks said. Renner didn't respond. As Brooks drove away, the red and blue lights faded in his rearview mirror. But the stop hadn't ended. It had only changed direction. 2 weeks later, Jeffrey Paul Renner received a message telling him to report to headquarters at 9 in the morning. No explanation, just a room number. He arrived early, wearing his uniform, badge polished, posture straight. 15 years on, the force had taught him that confidence still mattered, even when questions were coming. The conference room door was closed. Inside were 3 people. One from the department's legal office, 2 men in suits he didn't recognize. Sergeant Renner, one of them said. I'm Special Agent Calvin Brooks, FBI. Renner didn't speak. The questions started calmly. Shift schedules, patrol zones, traffic stops. Then they narrowed. Old National Highway. Late-night stops, cash seizures, body cam footage, screens lit up around the room, video clips, audio transcripts, timestamps that didn't line up. A spreadsheet showed 3 years of data. The same roads, the same hours, the same demographics. Renner leaned back in his chair. You're twisting this. We're documenting it, Calvin Brooks replied. By the end of the day, Renner was placed on administrative leave. His badge and service weapon were taken. Within a month, federal prosecutors had opened a case. Former traffic stops were reviewed quietly. Charges were dismissed without explanation. Letters went out to drivers who had never thought anyone would ask them what really happened. Some didn't respond. Others did. Their stories were different in detail, but identical in pattern. Same words, same threats, same choice offered in the dark. When Renner was arrested, it wasn't dramatic. 2 agents met him in his driveway just after dawn. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as he was placed in handcuffs and guided into an unmarked car. The indictment listed civil rights violations, extortion under color of law, evidence tampering, and obstruction. At trial, the courtroom stayed quiet. The jury watched the footage, listened to the data, heard the testimony. When Darnell Brooks took the stand, he didn't raise his voice. I did what I was told, he said. I stayed calm. The verdict came back guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge looked directly at Renner. You abused the authority given to you, she said. You targeted people you believed had no protection. 15 years in federal prison. Renner said nothing. Outside the courthouse, there were no cheers, just silence. Some victims stood together. Some walked away alone. The road where it started stayed the same. Cars still pulled over at night. Lights still flashed. But one pattern was gone. One phone call hadn't fixed the system. It had exposed it. And sometimes, that's how the truth finally breaks through.